Hi Ella, this is the second part of Chapter 4 of Golden Aquarians. The snails went on multiplying. By now, all the walkways had collapsed, and the tractor treads were being attacked. The whole area to the north of the compound hill, where the work of digging drains and erecting dikes was going on, was infested with snails, their silvery trails beginning to eat into everything that wasn't part of Aqua. Walt could see his father's dream collapsing around him. What will you do? He asked one evening. The colonel's temper suddenly flared. He swore and threw his glass across the room. A few liters of systemic poison in the groundwater, and I could take care of the whole problem. Walt turned from picking up the glass. It was plastic, of course, so no damage had been done, and froze. Poison the water? He thought of the green face with its amber eyes. Oh no! But those bleeding heart do-gooders back at Federation headquarters with their tomfool rules won't allow it. How am I supposed to get the job done with my hands tied behind my back? Walt breathed again and put the glass on the table. The colonel's solution was almost as horrible as poison. He had all the snails dredged up, dumped in a shining pile, and lasered to a sticky goo. The remains stank. The smell of burning snail shells hung over the compound and got into everyone's hair and clothes, like the bitter tang of a forest fire. Even the food tasted of it. Tempers began to fray, and Walt heard ugly words about the colonel, stories about what he'd done on other planets. He tried to shut his ears to the mutterings and lie low, to be as invisible as possible. He even tried to avoid Slovag, but she'd have none of that. Hey, it's a disgusting solution, but it's not your fault, Walt. Lighten up. By the end of the week, it seemed that the problem was licked, and his father became almost jovial, sitting with Walt on the porch. The secret of success is never giving way, son. Never even imagining the possibility of failure. I know I can beat Aqua, the way I've beaten other planets. Every one since Saturnus V. When his jaw clamped tight, so his face looked like a stone statue, Walt knew he was thinking about his mother. He wanted desperately to say something that would help, but he couldn't think of anything. He put his hand on his father's arm. The colonel looked at him. You're more like her every day. He put his hand over Walt's, and they sat on the porch, listening to the rain. The next week, another generation of snails hatched, and the whole horrible business of lasering them to extinction was gone through again. And on the Saturday after Dr. Helgard had taken the strapping off Walt's cracked ribs, he and Slovag were sitting on the surgery porch. The stench of burning snails drifted up on the wet breeze. It was sickening. I'm sure glad your ribs have healed at last. I can't wait to get away from the camp. Think you'll be fit enough to go back to the cave tomorrow? I guess so. Yes, it'll be good to get away. The only problem is that the walkway to the other hills dissolved, and I heard Father say they're not going to bother replacing it. All the work's being done up in the north. There's nothing down south to make it worth their while. Well, that's good in a way, isn't it? It means nobody will interfere with us. Is the marsh shallow enough for us to wade through? I doubt it, and it would take us forever. Have you ever tried to walk through even knee-high water? But there are some small boats the survey crews use. Could you ask your father if we could borrow one? He's in a foul mood these days, Slovag. Those snails. Are you trying to wriggle out of your promise, Walter Elliot? No, of course not, but I don't think I'll ask him for a boat. If he said no, we'd be stuck. Let's just borrow one. There's my boy, Slovag grinned at him. How will we do it? I thought that if I slipped out of the house before Father was up tomorrow, I could sneak down to the boathouse, get a canoe or something, and paddle away from the work site before the morning shift goes on. And what about me? I could pick you up south of the compound. Leaving you to have all the fun? No way! I'll meet you outside your house before daylight. What time? Father's usually up at 6. Can you manage 5 o'clock? Sure, I'll tell Mom I'll be away for the day so she won't worry. How about you? What'll you tell your dad? He doesn't usually worry about what I'm doing on weekends, But to be on the safe side, I'll leave my bed so it looks like I'm still sleeping. Then he won't bother me, and he won't be back till after supper. If then. The only thing I'm not sure of is waking up on time. I can't use an alarm clock. He'd hear it for sure. I'll scratch on your window. Leave it open a bit and I'll throw stones at you if you don't wake up right away. And I'll get us lunches from the cafeteria. Slovig's eyes sparkled, and Walt wondered again what he'd got himself into. She was a bit like a runaway horse, galloping off with him farther than he'd dare go on his own. And he didn't know how to rein her in. But he began to protest. But nothing, she smiled at him. You need a friend, Walter Elliot. And like I said, 2 heads are better than 1. She was right, of course. That was the trouble. She nearly always was. Okay, you be there at 5. It went like clockwork. Walt woke up at the first tap against his window and peered out. Slovig was crouching on the ground directly below. Quickly he pulled on his clothes and rain gear, cramming his flashlight into his pocket. He rolled up his blanket and flopped it onto the bed in a realistic a pose as he could and covered it with his sheet. Then he pushed the window fully open and slid through, closing it carefully behind him. They ran silently down the hill, past the houses, the school, and the cafeteria, past the work site where the great earth movers stood like sleeping dinosaurs, while workers swarmed over them, repairing the damage caused by the snails. They slipped through the shadows to the row of supply huts. The doors weren't locked. There was no place on Aqua to hide any stolen goods, so there were no thieves and no need for locks. Close to the water in the last hut were the boats, small plastic canoes. They hadn't been used since the initial survey, Walt guessed, and so hadn't been attacked by the snails. There's no engine. How does it go? Walt stared. Arm power, of course. He pointed to the paddles clipped to the thwarts. Haven't you ever seen a canoe? Do you know how to make it go? I grew up paddling on the Old Man River. Compared with that, this place is like a bathtub. Come on, lift up that end. Okay. Her voice was nervous, as if she were having second thoughts. The reeds will be a nuisance. You'll have to help me by paddling a bit from the bow so we don't get tangled. Climb in, then. You're sure it won't sink? Of course not. Get in, unless you'd rather not go. It felt good being the one in charge for a change. Huh! Slovig bounced into the boat, and it grounded on the boggy bottom. Walt had to heave the stern free and jump for it. The boat wobbled and righted itself as he knelt, his back against the crossbar, his fingers already crooked around the paddle, feeling the familiar tug against the water. What do I do now? What am I supposed to do? Slovig's voice rose. Shh! Don't yell. Someone'll hear. Sound carries like crazy over water. Hold your paddle like this. Your left hand snugged over the top, right hand circling it loosely partway down. Keep it on the right side of the bow, and push in toward the boat to turn us to the right, and outward to turn us left. If there's a real tangle dead ahead, tell me whether to aim left or right. Like this? Is this okay? That's fine, Slovig. But don't worry anyway. I can paddle single-handed if I have to. It's just easier with someone in the bow, especially with all these reeds. It felt good to be back in a familiar element. The paddle fit comfortably in his hand, and he knelt tall, seeing past Slovig's neat head, the silvery grayness of small patches of open water between clumps of reeds, and seemingly impenetrable carpets of quaggy moss. It felt good to feel again the pressure of water against his paddle, to hear the faint splash as he drew it out and dug in again. Do you suppose anyone can see us? Slovig whispered. Not a chance. Even if they were looking this way, the reeds are way over our heads. Down here against the water was the real Aqua. Walt found himself thinking, not like the compound where every scrap of vegetation had been scraped away and replaced with walks, houses, and workshops. Not like the work site where the earth movers gouged into the mud. Down here was the real planet, gray in the pre-dawn light, untouched by human technology. And this is the end of part 2 of chapter 4.